When I asked about the date of my son's wedding, my daughter-in-law said, "We got married yesterday, just for special people." A week later, she called screaming, "The rent is overdue. Did you transfer it?" I swirled the wine in my glass and replied, "Didn't I tell you? Since I wasn't special enough for the wedding, I guess I'm not special enough to pay your rent anymore." Welcome to the real world, sweetheart. My name is Thomas. To my neighbors in this quiet Chicago suburb, I am just an old man driving a 10-year-old Ford and wearing flannel shirts that have seen better days. To my son Justin and his new wife Brittany, I am a walking ATM that has finally run out of cash, a relic they keep around only when they need something. But what none of them know is that to the business world, I am the silent majority shareholder of Caldwell Logistics, the company that moves half the freight in this state. I spent 40 years building an empire from a single delivery truck so my family would never know hunger. But I made a fatal mistake. I shielded them from the struggle so they never learned the value of the dollar or the value of respect. If you have ever felt taken for granted by the people you sacrificed everything for, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my heart broke, but I didn't know it yet. The late afternoon sun was filtering through the blinds of my home office, casting long shadows across the room. I was sitting at my vintage oak desk, the one I bought when I made my first million back in the 80s. It is scratched and worn just like me, but it is solid. My hand hovered over my checkbook. I felt a swell of pride in my chest, a warm feeling that fathers get when they can provide for their children. I carefully wrote the date, then the name. Justin Caldwell. Then the amount. $50,000. It was supposed to be a surprise. An early wedding gift to help them with the down payment on a house or a honeymoon or whatever young people spent money on these days. Justin had been evasive about the wedding details for months. Every time I asked, he would say, "We are still finalizing the guest list, Dad," or "It is going to be very modern. You might not like the venue." I tried to be understanding. I know I am old school. I prefer a church and a reception hall, not a barn or a beach. But I just wanted to be there. I just wanted to see my only son start his new life. I picked up the phone and dialed Justin's number. I needed to know the date so I could book my flight and maybe buy a new suit. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I expected it to go to voicemail. Justin was always busy, or so he claimed. He was a mid-level marketing manager at a firm I secretly helped him get into, but he acted like he was running Wall Street. Suddenly the line connected. But it wasn't Justin's voice. "Hello?" It was Brittany. Her voice was high-pitched, slurred, and surrounded by noise. I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses, the murmur of a crowd, and soft jazz music playing in the background. It sounded like a celebration. "Brittany, it is Tom," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful. "I was looking for Justin. I wanted to ask about the wedding date. I have my checkbook out right now, and I want to make sure I am ready for the big day." There was a pause on the other end, then a giggle, a cruel, dismissive giggle that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Oh, Tom," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You are calling about the date. Well, this is awkward. You can put your checkbook away. You do not need to book a flight." I gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean? Is everything okay? Did you break up? No, silly." She laughed again, and I heard her whisper something to someone nearby. "We didn't break up. We got married yesterday. We are in Napa Valley right now. We are at the reception." My world stopped. The silence in my office was deafening. I looked at the check on my desk, the ink still wet. $50,000. Yesterday I whispered, my voice trembling not with anger, but with a sudden hollow emptiness. "You got married yesterday. And you didn't tell me." Brittany sighed, the sound of someone who was being inconvenienced by a pest. "Look, Tom, don't be dramatic. It was a very intimate ceremony, very modern. We only invited people who match our vibe. You know, influencers, young entrepreneurs, people from the agency. It was just for special people. Special people. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. You would have felt so out of place, Tom, she continued, emboldened by my silence. It is very high-end. We are at the Vineyard Estate. It is exclusive. We didn't want you sitting in the corner looking uncomfortable in your old suit. It would have ruined the aesthetic of the photos. Anyway, Justin is busy networking. We will stop by when we get back to pick up our gift. Bye, Tom. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone. I looked down at my old flannel shirt. I looked at the photos of Justin on my shelf from his first baseball game to his college graduation. I had been at every single one of those events. I had paid for every single one of those events. Special people. I almost laughed out loud. A dry, bitter laugh. Brittany, with her 2,000 Instagram followers and her arrogance, had no idea who she was talking to. She bragged about the Vineyard Estate in Napa Valley as if it were Olympus. She didn't know that the logistics of getting their high-end wines from California to Chicago was handled exclusively by my company. She didn't know that I had personally signed the supply chain contract with the owner of that estate 20 years ago over a glass of scotch. She didn't know that the wine she was currently drinking, the wine she thought made her so sophisticated, was likely paid for by the corporate discount I secretly applied to Justin's account so he could look rich. I was the reason the wine was in her glass. I was the reason the food was on her plate. I was the reason the roof was over her head. But I wasn't special enough to be there. I looked at the check again. $50,000. It represented months of dividends. It represented my love. It represented my hope for their future. Slowly, methodically, I picked up the check. The paper felt crisp between my fingers. I didn't rip it in frustration. I didn't crumble it in rage. I tore it with the cold precision of a businessman terminating a bad contract. Rip. Half the money was gone. Rip. The other half vanished. I dropped the pieces into the metal trash can beside my desk. They fluttered down like snow. That was it. The line had been drawn. They wanted an old man who was invisible. They wanted a ghost who only materialized to sign checks. Well, they were about to get their wish. The ATM was out of service. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the driveway. I needed fresh air. I needed to clear the sound of her laughter from my head. But just as I reached for the blinds, a car screeched into my driveway. It was a silver BMW, my BMW. Well, technically the company's BMW that I had let Justin use indefinitely. The car door slammed. I saw Justin stepping out wearing a linen suit that probably cost more than my first car. Brittany followed him, looking like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine, holding a phone up to her face, undoubtedly live streaming. They weren't in Napa. They were back. And they were here. My doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite ring. It was a demand. A long, continuous press that echoed through the empty house. I took a deep breath. The sadness in my chest began to harden into something else. Something colder. Something stronger. I adjusted my glasses, smoothed down my flannel shirt, and walked toward the door. The father who wrote checks was gone. The man who built an empire was about to answer the door. The air in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees as Brittany stepped inside. She did not offer a hug. She did not offer a warm smile. Instead, she wrinkled her nose as if she had just walked into a fish market rather than the home where her husband grew up. She waved a manicured hand in front of her face, dispelling air that wasn't there. God. Justin, she said, her voice piercing the quiet of my afternoon. It smells like mothballs and ancient history in here. Do you not have air purifiers? I stood there holding the door open, feeling the cold draft from outside mix with the chill coming from my daughter-in-law. Hello to you too, Brittany, I said, keeping my voice steady. Justin walked in past me, avoiding my eyes. He mumbled a quick, "Hi, Dad," but his attention was already on his wife, making sure she was comfortable, making sure the floorboards didn't scuff her heels. He looked tired. His expensive suit was wrinkled at the back, and there were dark circles under his eyes that the designer sunglasses couldn't quite hide. I closed the door, shutting out the world, but unfortunately trapping the trouble inside. They walked into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Brittany didn't sit down immediately. She stood in the center of the room, turning in a slow circle, scanning the furniture with the critical eye of a health inspector. My living room is not modern. It is filled with solid oak furniture, bookshelves lined with classics, and a Persian rug that my late wife and I bought in Istanbul 30 years ago. It is a room with a soul. But to Brittany, it was just a collection of junk. "You know," she said, running a finger along the mantelpiece and checking for dust. "This place is huge, just massive. It is really too much space for one person, don't you think, Tom? I mean, look at all this. It is just gathering dust. It is depressing, honestly." I walked over to my armchair, the leather groaning familiarly as I sat down. "I like the space," I replied simply. "It holds memories." "Memories don't pay the heating bill," Justin chimed in. He was standing by the window looking out at the sprawling garden that I tended to every weekend. "Dad, she has a point. The property tax alone on this place must be killing you. We are just worried about you. You are getting older. Maintaining a house this size, the yard work, the repairs. It is a burden you shouldn't have to carry at your age." I looked at my son. I saw the rehearsal in his stance. They had practiced this conversation in the car, probably on the drive over from their secret wedding. I decided to play along. I decided to be the feeble old man they wanted to see. I hunched my shoulders slightly and let my hands tremble as I reached for the teapot on the coffee table. "It is a bit of work," I admitted, my voice rasping slightly. "But I manage." "What are you suggesting?" Brittany sat down, then perched on the edge of the sofa, as if afraid the fabric might be contagious. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "Well, we found this amazing community. It is called Golden Horizon. It is an assisted living facility, but it is like a resort. Really. They have bingo nights, water aerobics, and nurses on call 24/7. You would have your own little studio apartment. You would be around people your own age. You wouldn't be so lonely." I poured tea into 3 cups. I didn't drink tea, I preferred black coffee, but tea felt like the right prop for this scene. "And the price?" I asked. "How much does this resort cost?" "Oh, it is not cheap," Justin said, quickly turning from the window. "Quality care never is, but that is the beauty of it. We have a plan. A financial restructuring that benefits everyone." I took a sip of the hot liquid, letting the steam cloud my glasses so they couldn't see the sharp look in my eyes. "Tell me about this plan." Brittany clapped her hands together. "Okay, so here is the vision. This house sits on a double lot in a prime development zone. We checked the zoning laws. Developers are dying for land like this. If you sell now, you could get a fortune. Enough to pay for 10 years at Golden Horizon easily. And the rest of the money?" I asked. "Well, that is the best part," she smiled, showing all her teeth. "Justin and I are looking at this incredible villa in the hills. It is modern, eco-friendly, perfect for our brand. But we need a substantial down payment. If you sell this place, you pay for your care, and the surplus goes to us. It is an investment in your son's future. You get care, we get a home. Everyone wins." I looked at Justin. My son. The boy I taught to ride a bike on this very driveway. The boy I held when he scraped his knees. He was nodding along, convinced by the logic of greed. "Dad, think about it," he said. "You are sitting on a gold mine, but you are living like a pauper. It is a waste of resources. You do not need 4 bedrooms. We are just trying to optimize the family assets." Optimize. That was a corporate word. A cold word. They didn't see a home. They saw a liquidation opportunity. They saw an asset to be stripped and sold so they could buy status. I am not sure, I said, slowly putting the cup down with a deliberate rattle. I promised your mother I would keep this house. She loved that garden. Brittany rolled her eyes. A gesture so disrespectful it took all my willpower not to throw them out right then. Oh, please, Tom. She is gone. Dead people don't care about real estate. You need to be practical. Do you want to die alone in this big drafty museum? Or do you want to be somewhere safe while your son succeeds? Don't be selfish. Selfish. The word hung in the air. I had given them everything. I had funded college cars, vacations. And now holding on to the roof over my head was selfish. I need more tea, I said, my voice shaking. I reached for the heavy ceramic teapot. My hand wavered. I watched Brittany. She had placed her designer handbag, a limited edition piece that I knew cost more than my car, on the floor right next to the coffee table. It was open. Here, let me help. Justin started to say, but he didn't move. He just watched. I lifted the pot. I let my hand shake violently. The spout tipped. A stream of scalding hot, dark Earl Grey tea shot out. It missed the cup. It missed the table. It landed directly into the open mouth of Brittany's bag. Oh dear, I said, watching the brown liquid soak into the silk lining and splash over her leather wallet and phone. My hands are just so clumsy these days. Brittany screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of material loss. She jumped up, knocking the coffee table with her knees. My bag. My God, my bag. You stupid old man. Look what you did. This is vintage. This is irreplaceable. She grabbed the bag, turning it upside down. Tea dripped onto my Persian rug, but I didn't mind. The rug had survived wars. It could survive tea. Her bag, however, was ruined. Dad, watch what you are doing, Justin yelled, rushing to her side, pulling napkins from the dispenser and frantically dabbing at the leather. You have to be more careful. That bag cost $5,000. I sat back, clutching my chest as if the excitement was too much for my frail heart. I am so sorry, I wheezed. My grip isn't what it used to be. Maybe you are right. Maybe I am getting too old. Brittany was near tears, her face red with rage. She glared at me with pure hatred. There was no mask of concern now. Just the raw, ugly face of a spoiled child denied her toy. We are leaving, she hissed at Justin. I need to get this to a specialist immediately. But we haven't finished discussing the house, Justin said, torn between his weeping wife and the potential payday. We are done, she snapped. We are leaving. She turned to me, pointing a manicured finger that was now stained with tea. You have 1 week, Tom. 1 week to sign the papers for the sale. I am not going to let you ruin our future with your incompetence. Get your act together. We will be back next Sunday, and I expect those papers ready. She stormed out, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood. Justin looked at me, sighed, and shook his head. You really made a mess, Dad. Just think about what we said. It is for your own good. He turned and followed her. The door slammed shut, rattling the picture frames on the wall. I sat there in the silence, listening to the roar of the BMW engine fading down the street. I looked at the teapot. My hand was perfectly steady now. I poured myself a fresh cup, not spilling a single drop. 1 week, and I whispered to the empty room. They gave me 1 week to surrender. They thought they were negotiating with a helpless old pensioner. They didn't know they had just declared war on a man who had negotiated hostile takeovers before they were even born. They wanted an answer next Sunday. Oh, I would give them an answer, but it wouldn't be the one they were expecting. I took a sip of tea. It tasted bitter, but the aftertaste was sweet. The game was on. The silence in the house after they left was heavy, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. I stood by the window for a long time watching the empty driveway where my son's car had been. The smell of Earl Grey tea still lingered in the living room, a damp, earthy scent that reminded me of the act I had just put on. I had played the clumsy, trembling old man perfectly. But as I walked back to my study, my steps were firm. My hands were steady. The mask was off. Something Brittany had said nagged at me. She had talked about financial restructuring and optimizing assets with a little too much confidence. She spoke like someone who had already counted the money in my pockets before I had even agreed to give it to them. It made me uneasy. I have an instinct for fraud. It is a skill I honed over 40 years in logistics. You learn to spot when a manifest doesn't match the cargo. And right now, my son's lifestyle didn't match his income. I sat down at my desk and woke up my computer. The screen glowed, illuminating the dark room. I hesitated for a moment before opening the browser. There was a part of me, the fatherly part, that didn't want to know, that wanted to believe they were just misguided, entitled kids, but not criminals. But the businessman in me knew better. The businessman knew that trust is good, but verification is better. I navigated to the bank's website. I have many accounts, most of them managed by private wealth firms that Justin doesn't even know exist. But there was one account, a standard savings account at a local branch that I kept for appearances. It was joint-owned with Justin. I had opened it when he was a freshman in college to transfer his allowance, and I had never removed his name. Over the years, I had labeled it explicitly in the description line as Tom's Emergency Medical Fund. I kept about $25,000 in there. It was the money I supposedly relied on for my prescriptions for unexpected surgeries, for the very frailty they were so eager to exploit. To them, this wasn't pocket change. To them, this was my lifeline. I typed in the password. The page loaded. My heart didn't break this time. It turned into stone. The balance, which should have been $25,000, blinked back at me in stark black numbers. $5,000. I stared at the screen, blinking, hoping it was a mistake. I clicked on the transaction history. There it was. A withdrawal dated 3 weeks ago. A wire transfer for $20,000. The recipient was listed clearly. The Vineyard Estate, Napa Valley. Event deposit. I sat back in my chair, the breath leaving my lungs in a sharp hiss. They hadn't just ignored me. They hadn't just humiliated me. They had stolen from me. And they didn't steal from the billionaire Thomas Caldwell. They stole from the pensioner Tom, who they believed needed this money to survive. They took the money meant for my failing health and spent it on a wedding reception where I wasn't even welcome. They drank champagne paid for with my hip replacement fund. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was one thing to be greedy. It was another to be predatory toward your own father. I reached for the phone. My finger hovered over the dial button. I needed to hear him say it. I needed to hear the lie. I dialed Justin's number. It rang 4 times. He was probably screening me, hoping I would just go away or forget like the senile old man he thought I was. Finally, he picked up. The background noise was different this time. Quiet. Professional. "Yeah, Dad, what is it?" he said. His voice was impatient, clipped. "I just left your house an hour ago. We are still driving." I cleared my throat, injecting a tremor of panic into my voice. "Justin, I am looking at my bank statement, the one for my medical savings. The numbers look wrong." There was a silence on the other end, a beat too long, a calculated pause. "What do you mean wrong?" he asked, his voice tight. "It says $20,000 is missing," I said, making my voice rise in pitch. "It says it went to a vineyard. I didn't buy any wine, Justin. That is my surgery money. Did the bank make a mistake? Do I need to call the police?" "No," he shouted almost too quickly. "Do not call the police, Dad." Jesus. Calm down. Then where is the money, Justin? I am scared. That is all I have. I could hear him exhaling sharply. I could almost see him rolling his eyes, signaling to Brittany that the old man was causing trouble again. Dad, look, it is probably just a banking error, or maybe a hold. Systems update all the time. You know how technology is. You probably are reading the statement wrong. You get confused with these things. I am reading it right now, Justin, I pressed. It says Vineyard Estate. Listen, I can't do this right now, he snapped. I am walking into a very important meeting. My boss is waiting. We are pitching a huge client. I will look into it later, okay? It is just a glitch. Don't call the bank. Don't call anyone. I will fix it. Just let me work. He hung up. I lowered the phone slowly. A glitch. He called theft a glitch. He called betraying his father a system update. And then he used the oldest excuse in the book. The big meeting. The important job. I looked at the clock on the wall. 2:30 in the afternoon. He thought he was safe because I was just a confused old man stuck in the suburbs. He thought I would sit here wringing my hands waiting for him to come save me from the imaginary banking error. He thought he had bought himself time. But he forgot who I was. I stood up and walked to the closet. I pushed aside the flannel shirts and the worn-out cardigans. Reaching to the back inside a garment bag that hadn't been opened in 5 years, I pulled out a suit. It was a charcoal gray Brioni tailored to perfection. It was a suit of armor from a life I had left behind. I stripped off the clothes of the victim. I put on the white, crisp shirt, fastening the cufflinks that felt cold and heavy against my wrists. I pulled on the trousers, then the jacket. I looked in the mirror. The hunched, trembling old man was gone. Staring back at me was Thomas Caldwell, the man who chewed up competitors for breakfast. Justin said he was in a meeting. He said his boss was waiting. Well, I decided as I straightened my tie, I think it is time I crashed that meeting. I happen to know the CEO of his company very well. In fact, I hired him 20 years ago when he was just a kid out of business school. If Justin wanted to play the big shot corporate executive, I was going to give him a lesson in corporate governance he would never forget. I grabbed my keys. Not the keys to the Ford. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a key fob that had been gathering dust. It unlocked the black sedan I kept in a storage unit 3 blocks away. I walked out of the house. I didn't lock the door. I had a feeling that by the time I came back, the safety of this house would be the least of my worries. I was going to the city. I was going to see this meeting. And I was going to see exactly how my son spent his stolen fortune. The drive to the city usually took 40 minutes. I planned to make it in 30. The ATM was closed. The auditor was coming. The drive to the city center was a blur of gray highways and red taillights matching the storm brewing inside me. I parked my car 2 blocks away from the Zenith, the ultra-luxury residential tower that dominated the skyline. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, looking at the building's glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture. I knew every beam, every rivet, and every pane of glass in that structure because 20 years ago, my construction firm had built it. And today, through a complex web of holding companies and trusts, I was still the sole owner of the entire property. My son lived in the penthouse not because he could afford the $15,000 monthly rent, but because I had quietly instructed the management company to give him a 90% discount under a generic corporate housing program. He thought he was a brilliant negotiator. He didn't know he was living on my charity. I stepped out of the car. I had kept on my old comfortable flannel shirt and the worn-out trousers I used for gardening. I wanted to see them as I was not as the wealthy benefactor they hoped for. I wanted to see if a father was welcome simply because he was a father. As I approached the main entrance, the revolving glass doors spun slowly, admitting men in Italian suits and women dripping in jewelry. The doorman, a young man with broad shoulders and a uniform that cost more than my first car, stepped in front of me before I could even reach the handle. He didn't look me in the eye. He looked at my scuffed shoes. "Deliveries are around the back, old-timer," he said, his voice flat and bored. "Service entrance is down the alley." I stopped straightening my back as much as I could. "I am not a delivery man," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I am here to visit a resident, Justin Caldwell, in the penthouse." The doorman let out a short, incredulous laugh. He looked at his colleague standing by the desk and smirked. "The penthouse. Right. And I am the King of England. Look, sir, we have a strict no-soliciting policy. If you want a handout, the shelter is 3 blocks east. Now move along before you disturb the guests." I felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp. I wanted to tell him that I signed his paycheck. I wanted to tell him that I could have him fired before he blinked. But I swallowed the rage. I needed to get upstairs. "Call him," I insisted. "Tell him his father is here." The doorman sighed, clearly annoyed that I wasn't leaving. He tapped his earpiece. "We have a situation at the front." Older male. Disheveled. Claims to be related to Mr. Caldwell in the penthouse. "Yeah. Okay." He looked at me with a mixture of pity and irritation. "Mrs. Caldwell is coming down. You stand over there, away from the door." I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, the elevator dinged and Brittany stepped out. She wasn't dressed for a business meeting. She was wearing a cocktail dress that glittered under the lobby lights, and her hair was styled in an elaborate updo. She looked beautiful and expensive, and completely out of place for a Tuesday afternoon work event. She saw me, and her face twisted in horror. She rushed over her heels, clicking rapidly on the marble floor, marble that I had personally selected from a quarry in Italy. She grabbed my arm and pulled me further away from the entrance behind a large potted palm. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You look like a homeless person." "My God, Tom, do you have no shame? I have investors arriving any minute. I have friends from the agency coming." I pulled my arm away. "I need to see Justin," I said. "It is about the bank account." "Not now," she snapped, looking around frantically to ensure no one was watching. "Justin is busy. We are hosting a networking mixer. You cannot go up there looking like this. You smell like old furniture and desperation. I am his father, Brittany, and I am going up." She glared at me, calculating the risk. She knew if she caused a scene, it would attract attention. She took a deep breath and pinched the bridge of her nose. "Fine. You can go up. But you are not walking through my lobby. You are not riding in the main elevator with my guests. I will not have you ruining the aesthetic of my event." She turned to the doorman. "Escort him to the service elevator." The service elevator. The words hit me harder than a physical blow. In my own building. The building that was the crown jewel of my portfolio. I was being told to take the garbage route. Brittany turned back to me, her eyes cold. "It is around the back. Take it to the top floor. And for God's sake, stay in the kitchen when you get there. Do not mingle." She spun around and walked back toward the main elevators, putting on a bright, fake smile as she greeted a couple walking in. I stood there for a moment, feeling the humiliation wash over me. The doorman jerked his head toward the side exit. "This way, Pops." I walked down the narrow alleyway. The smell of dumpsters and stale city air filled my nose. I reached the heavy steel doors of the service entrance. There was no marble here, just concrete and fluorescent lights that buzzed with a headache-inducing hum. I pressed the button. The service elevator rattled as it descended. When the doors opened, it was empty save for a few scratches on the metal walls and a lingering scent of cleaning chemicals and refuse. I stepped inside. As the heavy doors clamped shut, enclosing me in the metal box, I looked at the inspection certificate framed on the wall. There at the bottom was the signature of the building owner's representative, T. Caldwell, my signature. I let out a dry, humorless chuckle. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. Here I was, the man who owned the roof over their heads, the man who paid for the clothes on their backs, rising slowly through the spine of my own creation, treated like something to be hidden away. I was trash riding with the trash. The elevator was slow. It stopped at several floors, but no one got on. It gave me time to think. Time to let the sadness evaporate and the resolve solidify. They were ashamed of me. They thought I was a stain on their perfect, curated life. They wanted me hidden in the kitchen like a dirty secret. Well, I thought, watching the floor numbers tick upward. If they treat me like a servant, perhaps it is time I showed them who really holds the keys to the kingdom. The elevator finally reached the penthouse level. It didn't open into the grand foyer with the chandelier. It opened into the back of the scullery, a narrow hallway lined with shelves of expensive wine and catering supplies. I stepped out softly. The noise of the party was loud here. Bass from the music system thumped through the walls. I could hear laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the chatter of dozens of people. I crept forward, moving toward the swinging door that led to the main kitchen area. I wasn't going to barge in. Not yet. I had learned in business that information is more valuable than force. I wanted to hear what they said when they thought no one was listening. I stood by the door, peering through the small circular window. The kitchen was crowded with caterers preparing trays of hors d'oeuvres. But just beyond the kitchen island, in a semi-private nook near the wet bar, I saw my son. Justin was holding a glass of scotch. He wasn't in a meeting. He was leaning against the counter, laughing. Next to him was a man I didn't recognize, a tall, slick-looking guy in a blue suit. And Brittany was there too, her hand resting casually, too casually, on the stranger's arm. I leaned in closer, straining to hear over the music. "Don't worry about the old man," I heard Brittany say, her voice carrying that same mocking tone she used on the phone. "He is harmless. He is totally senile. He thinks he spilled tea by accident today, but he is just losing his motor skills. And the money," the stranger asked. Justin took a sip of his drink and smirked. "He won't figure it out. I told him it was a bank glitch. He barely knows how to use a smartphone. By the time he realizes the money is gone, we will have the house sold and the proceeds in our account. We just need to keep him confused for another week." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just theft. It was a conspiracy. My own son was plotting to gaslight me, to make me doubt my own sanity, just to rob me blind. Brittany laughed, clinking her glass against the stranger's. "To the new villa," she toasted, "and to the end of the mothball era." I stood in the shadows of the service hallway, my hand gripping the doorframe until my knuckles turned white. The shame of the service elevator was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They were celebrating my demise. They were drinking to my destruction. I stepped back from the door. I didn't enter the party. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a punch. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I turned around and pressed the button for the service elevator again. I was going back down. I had seen enough, and now I had a phone call to make. A call that would turn the lights out on this party forever. I stepped out of the service corridor and into the main living area of the penthouse. The transition was jarring. One moment, I was in a gray concrete hallway that smelled of garbage, and the next, I was immersed in a world of golden light. Crystal chandeliers and the overwhelming scent of expensive perfume and ambition. The room was crowded with people who looked like they had been manufactured in a factory for the beautiful and wealthy. Men in bespoke suits held tumblers of amber liquid, and women in dresses that cost more than a year of college tuition laughed with their heads thrown back. I stood by a large potted fern, adjusting the cuffs of my flannel shirt, feeling the rough fabric against my skin. It was a stark contrast to the silk and wool surrounding me. I was the stain on their perfect picture, the glitch in their matrix. But I didn't care. My eyes were scanning the room, hunting for my son. I found him near the buffet table, But he wasn't standing tall like the master of the house. He wasn't shaking hands or closing deals. Justin was rushing back and forth between the kitchen and the guests, carrying a silver tray loaded with empty glasses. He looked frantic. Sweat beads were forming on his forehead, glistening under the lights. "Justin, get more ice," I heard a voice snap. It was Brittany. She was standing in the center of the room holding court like a queen. She didn't look at him when she spoke. She just snapped her fingers in the air, a sharp, dismissive sound that cut through the jazz music. I watched my son, the boy I had raised to be strong, the boy I had educated at the best schools, duck his head and mumble, "Yes, honey," right away. He scurried off toward the kitchen, indistinguishable from the hired catering staff. My chest tightened. It wasn't anger yet. It was a profound, aching pity. He had traded his dignity for a woman who treated him like a servant in his own home. I took a step forward, intending to intercept him, to shake him by the shoulders and ask him where his pride had gone. But before I could reach him, Brittany spotted me. Her eyes went wide. For a second, I saw pure panic. She looked at her guests, then at me, then back at her guests. She abandoned the group she was talking to and rushed toward me, her smile fixed and brittle like glass. "Tom," she hissed through her teeth, her voice low and dangerous. "I told you to stay in the kitchen. What are you doing out here? You are ruining everything." "I came to speak to my son," I said, my voice rising slightly, ensuring the people nearby could hear. "I am his father." A hush fell over the small circle of people nearest to us. A woman with a diamond necklace turned and looked at me with amused curiosity. "Oh, Brittany, is this a relative?" she asked. Brittany froze. I saw the gears turning in her head. She looked at my flannel shirt, my worn trousers, my scuffed shoes. She couldn't admit I was her father-in-law. It would shatter the illusion of old money and high status she had so carefully constructed. She let out a high fake laugh and placed a hand on my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Oh goodness, no. This is Tom. He used to work for us. He was our handyman for years back at the old house. He is a little confused these days, poor thing. We let him stop by for a hot meal now and then out of charity." The woman with the diamonds smiled benevolently. "Oh, how sweet of you. You are such a saint, Brittany." "Hello, Tom. It is nice to see you are being taken care of." I felt the blood drain from my face. Handyman. Charity case. Confused. She had stripped me of my identity, my paternity, and my dignity in 3 sentences. She had reduced the man who owned the building she was standing in to a beggar she graciously fed. I looked at Brittany. Her eyes were hard, daring me to make a scene, daring me to prove her right, that I was just a crazy old man. I forced a smile. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. "Hello, ma'am," I said to the guest. "Yes, Brittany is certainly something else." Brittany squeezed my arm harder, practically dragging me toward the corner of the room. "Go stand over there," she whispered venomously. "Do not speak to anyone else. I will get Justin to deal with you in a minute." She left me by the floor-to-ceiling windows and turned back to the party, instantly switching on her charm. I stood there looking out at the city lights. Chicago sprawled below me, a grid of electricity and power. I owned so much of it. Yet here in this room, I was nothing. But the humiliation wasn't over. From my vantage point in the shadows, I saw Brittany return to the man in the blue suit, the one I had seen from the service hallway. The investor. They weren't talking about business. I saw the way he leaned in close to whisper in her ear. I saw the way she laughed, throwing her head back, exposing her throat. I saw his hand rest on the small of her back, his fingers moving in a slow, possessive caress that no business partner would ever dare. And then I saw Justin. He had returned with the bucket of ice. He was standing just a few feet away from them. He saw the hand on his wife's back. He saw the intimacy. He saw the way the man whispered to her. I held my breath, waiting for my son to react. waiting for him to drop the ice bucket to shove the man to demand respect. I waited for the Caldwell fire to show itself. But Justin did nothing. He stared at them for a long second, his face a mask of misery and resignation. Then he looked down at his shoes. He turned away, walking silently to the bar to refill the ice, acting as if he hadn't seen a thing. That was the moment the last thread of hope snapped. It wasn't just that he was stealing from me. It was that he was letting them steal his soul. He was financing a lifestyle for a woman who despised him, with money he stole from a father who loved him, all to impress strangers who didn't care if he lived or died. He was a coward, and a coward cannot be trusted with an empire. I looked at Brittany one last time. She was clinking glasses with her lover. Confident, radiant, thinking she had won. She thought the old man was cornered in the shadows, confused and helpless. She was wrong. The old man wasn't confused. The old man was done. I didn't wait for Justin. I didn't say goodbye. I turned and walked toward the door. Not the service door this time. I walked straight to the main entrance. "Hey, Tom, where are you going?" the doorman asked, as I pushed past him, my face like granite. I didn't answer. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, shutting out the noise of the party, I felt a strange sense of calm. The sadness was gone. The heartbreak was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard logic of a business decision. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was late, but I knew he would answer. He always answered. I dialed the number. "Hello," a voice answered on the second ring. Sharp. Alert. "James," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't waver. It sounded like steel. "Tom. Is everything all right?" "It is late." "Everything is clear now, James," I said, watching the floor numbers count down. "I need you to open the file. The full file." There was a pause on the other end. James knew what that meant. "Are you sure, Tom? Once we start this, there is no going back. This is the nuclear option." "I am sure," I said. "I want you to draft a notice, breach of contract, unauthorized renovations, and James calculate the full market value of the rent for the last 6 months. No discounts, no family rates. I want every penny accounted for." I stepped out into the lobby. The night air rushed in as the automatic doors opened. It was cold, but it felt clean. "And James," I added, walking toward my car, "call the board. Tell them to trigger the clawback clause on Justin's employment contract. I want it done by morning." I hung up the phone. The party upstairs was still raging. They were drinking my wine. They were standing on my floors. They were laughing at my expense. Let them laugh for one more night. Because tomorrow the landlord is coming to collect. And eviction is a very ugly business. The elevator ride to the 50th floor of the Sterling and Hart law firm was silent and swift. My ears popped as the altitude climbed, a physical sensation that mirrored the pressure building inside my chest. When the doors slid open, the office was dimly lit, the staff having gone home hours ago. Only the reception desk lamp was on, and behind the frosted glass doors at the end of the hall, a single light burned. James was waiting for me. He was sitting at his mahogany conference table, a bottle of single malt scotch, and 2 crystal tumblers already set out. James has been my personal attorney for 30 years. He knows where the bodies are buried because he helped me dig the holes, legally speaking. He stood up when I entered, his face grim. He didn't offer a handshake. He just poured the amber liquid into the glasses and pointed to the leather chair opposite him. "You look like hell, Tom," he said softly, sliding a glass toward me. "I feel like it," I replied, taking the drink but not drinking it. "I just came from the penthouse. I saw them." James nodded slowly. He sat down and placed a hand on a thick manila folder resting in the center of the table. The folder was stamped with the word "confidential" in red ink. It looked innocent enough, just paper and cardboard, but I knew that what was inside had the power to destroy lives. I ran the background check you asked for, James said, his voice professional, but laced with the sympathy of an old friend. And I had the forensic accountant look into Justin's personal finances and the accounts of the marketing firm he works for. Tom, you need to brace yourself. It is worse than we thought. I leaned forward, my hands clasping together on the cool wood of the table. I am done being surprised, James. Just give it to me. He opened the folder. The first thing he pulled out was a stack of photographs. They were high resolution, taken with a telephoto lens. They showed Brittany. She was at a restaurant in the city, at a hotel bar, and walking out of a brownstone in the Gold Coast district. In every photo she was with the same man. The man in the blue suit I had seen at the party. The so-called investor. His name is Marcus Thorne. James said, tapping the man's face in the photo. He is not an investor. He is a high-end con artist with a record for fraud in 3 states. He targets women who are desperate to climb the social ladder. He promises them access to exclusive circles, and in exchange he uses them. I looked at the photos. In one, Brittany was kissing him. In another, she was handing him a thick envelope. She is not just cheating on Justin, James continued. She is financing Thorne. We tracked the withdrawals. That $20,000 from your medical fund. It didn't go to a vineyard. It went to a shell company registered to Thorne. She is paying him to be her lover and her gateway to high society. I felt a wave of nausea. My son wasn't just being cuckolded. He was being drained to pay for his own replacement. Does Justin know? James sighed and pulled out a second set of documents. These were spreadsheets, bank statements, and copies of invoices. This is the part that worries me more, Tom. Justin knows about the money problems, but he doesn't know where the money is really going. He thinks Brittany is just overspending on luxury goods, but to keep up with her demands to keep her happy so she doesn't leave him. Justin has done something incredibly stupid. I looked at the spreadsheets. I saw my son's signature at the bottom of several invoices. They were for consulting services that were never rendered. He is laundering money, James said bluntly. It is small scale right now, but it is a felony. Thorne introduced Justin to some of his associates. Justin thinks he is being clever, moving money around for these guys, taking a 10% cut to pay off Brittany's credit cards. He thinks it is a victimless crime, but he is the signatory. When the IRS or the FBI catches wind of this, and they will, Thorne and Brittany will be ghosts. Justin will be the one left holding the bag. He is looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison, Tom. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. My son. A criminal. A fool. He was risking his freedom for a woman who was paying another man with the proceeds of his crime. It was a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions, written by an idiot. We have to stop him, I said, my voice hoarse. If I go to the police? If you go to the police, he is arrested. James cut in. If you tell him, he won't believe you. He is too deep in the lie. Brittany has him wrapped around her finger. She will convince him you are just a jealous, senile old man trying to break them up. We need to cut off the fuel supply. We need to wake him up. And the only way to do that is to let him hit the ground hard. I looked out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there in my building, the party was winding down. Justin was probably cleaning up the mess, thinking he was a big shot, because he had made a few $1,000s washing dirty money. He didn't know the walls were closing in. He needs to lose everything to see what he really has, I whispered. James nodded. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the bottom of the stack. This is the lease agreement for the penthouse. The one you had me draw up 5 years ago. It is technically a corporate housing contract between Caldwell Logistics and the tenant. I picked up the document. I remembered the day I signed it. I remembered feeling proud that I could give my son a castle in the sky. Now I realized I had just given him a golden cage that kept him blind to reality. I want you to look at Clause 14, James said. I scanned the page. Clause 14, Termination of subsidized status. In the event of contract breach, unauthorized structural alterations, or termination of employment with the sponsoring entity, the landlord reserves the right to retroactively apply market rate pricing for the preceding 6 months. I looked up at James. He was watching me closely, waiting for the order. They knocked down a wall to build a walk-in closet, I said, remembering the blueprints Brittany had bragged about on Instagram. That is unauthorized alteration, and Justin is no longer an employee in good standing. If you make that call to the CEO, James added. I closed the folder. The sound was final, like a gavel striking a block. The father in me wanted to run to the penthouse, hug my son, and write a check to make the bad men go away. But the father in me also knew that checks were what got us here in the first place. I had crippled him with comfort. Now I had to save him with pain. Do it, I said, my voice steady and cold. James reached for his pen. You want to serve the eviction notice? No, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. Not just the eviction. Activate Clause 14. Calculate the full market rent for the last 6 months. $15,000 a month plus penalties plus the cost of restoring that wall. Send them the bill tomorrow morning. But Tom James hesitated, the pen hovering over the paper. That will bankrupt him. He doesn't have that kind of money. It will destroy his credit, his savings, everything. I walked to the door, my hand resting on the brass handle. I looked back at my old friend. He is already bankrupt, James. He is morally bankrupt. I am just making the numbers match the reality. If he has nothing, Brittany will leave him. And when she leaves him, he might finally be able to see who she really is. It is the only way to save him from prison. Burn it down, James. Burn it all down. I walked out of the office, leaving the silence behind me. The elevator ride down felt different this time. I wasn't heavy anymore. I was light. It was the lightness of a surgeon who has just decided to amputate a limb to save the patient. It was going to be bloody. It was going to be agonizing. But it was necessary. The ATM was closed, the bank was foreclosing, and tomorrow the bill would come due. The morning sun that hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse did not bring warmth. It brought the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. I was not in the room when the email arrived, but I know my son and I know the woman he married. I can picture the scene with the clarity of a security camera feed. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. The expensive caterers had cleared away the debris of the party, leaving the apartment pristine and silent. Justin was likely sitting at the marble island, nursing a coffee and a headache, feeling that vague sense of anxiety that comes when you know you are living a lie but haven't yet been caught. Brittany would have been lounging on the sofa, scrolling through the photos from the night before, counting her likes, measuring her worth in double taps and heart emojis. Then the notification sound pinged on Justin's tablet. It was a sharp, standard chime, the kind that usually signals a meeting reminder or a spam email. But this one was different. This one carried the weight of a judge's gavel. Justin swiped the screen. I imagine his eyes narrowing as he saw the sender. T&C Group, Asset Management Division. He probably frowned. He knew the management company, of course, but he had never received a direct email from the asset division. Usually they just sent him a generic holiday card or a notice about window washing. He opened the email. Subject: Urgent notice of lease violation and subsidy termination. I can see the color draining from his face as he read the first paragraph. It was written in the cold, precise language of corporate law drafted by James just hours before. Dear Mr. Caldwell, this letter serves as formal notification that your eligibility for the partner relative housing subsidy has been revoked effective immediately. Furthermore, a recent inspection of the property has revealed unauthorized structural modifications to the master bedroom suite, specifically the removal of a load-bearing partition to create a walk-in wardrobe. This constitutes a direct violation of Clause 14 of your lease agreement. Justin must have stopped breathing. He knew about the wall. Brittany had insisted on it. She said the closet was too small for her collection. He had told her they needed a permit. She had called him a coward and hired a contractor herself. They thought no one would notice. They forgot that in a building like the Zenith, the walls have ears, and the maintenance staff reports everything to the owner. He continued reading, his hands starting to shake. Pursuant to the terms of your contract, the violation voids all preferential pricing retroactively for the preceding 6 months. You are hereby required to pay the difference between the subsidized rate and the fair market value of the property. The numbers were laid out in a neat table. Subsidized rent paid, $2,000 per month. Market rate rent, $15,000 per month. Difference owed per month, $13,000, multiplied by 6 months. Total arrears, $78,000. Penalty for unauthorized construction and restoration deposit, $12,000. Total amount due immediately, $90,000. Justin dropped the tablet. It clattered onto the marble counter, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. Brittany looked up from her phone, annoyed by the noise. "What is wrong with you?" she snapped. "You are going to scratch the marble." Justin couldn't speak. He just pointed at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Brittany rolled her eyes and walked over, her silk robe trailing behind her. She picked up the tablet. "What is it?" she asked, scanning the text. "Probably just a bill for the electricity. You know how these companies are. They always try to overcharge." Her voice trailed off. She froze. Her eyes locked on the bold figure at the bottom of the page. $90,000. "What is this?" she whispered, the panic starting to rise in her throat. "Is this a joke? Who is T&C Group? Why are they asking for $90,000? Justin found his voice. It was a weak, strangled thing. "It is the rent, Brittany. They caught us. They know about the wall you knocked down. They canceled the discount." Brittany's face turned from confusion to red-hot anger. She threw the tablet back onto the counter. "You told me it was handled. You told me your company Perks covered the housing. You said we were safe." "I thought we were—" Justin stammered, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what happened. Maybe it is a mistake. Maybe I can call someone." "Call someone," she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. "You better call someone, Justin, because I do not have $90,000. Do you have $90,000? Justin looked down at his feet. He knew exactly how much he had. He had about $4,000 in his checking account. The rest had gone to the wedding, the car lease, and the payments to Marcus Thorne's shell companies. He was broke. And now he was $90,000 in the hole with a 24-hour deadline. "This is your fault," she spat at him, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "You are so incompetent. You can't even manage a simple lease. I told you that wall was fine. Everybody does renovations. You just let them walk all over you. You need to fix this, Justin. Fix it now. Or do not think you are sleeping in this bed tonight." Justin sank onto a bar stool, burying his face in his hands. He was cornered. He had no money. He had no leverage. And he was terrified that if he told his boss about this, the money laundering scheme would come to light. He was trapped in a web of his own making. Brittany stopped pacing. She looked at him with disgust, then her eyes narrowed. A thought occurred to her, a survival instinct kicking in. "Wait," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The old man." Justin looked up. "Dad, what about him?" "He has money," she said, walking toward him. "He has that big house. He has his retirement savings. And didn't you say he has some emergency fund?" "He does," Justin said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But we already took the $20,000. He noticed it. He was asking about it yesterday." So what? Brittany snapped. He is senile. He probably forgot about it by this morning. Look, Justin, we need $90,000. Your dad sits on that property that is worth $500,000 easily. We just need to accelerate the plan. She grabbed his shoulders, shaking him slightly. Call him. Call him right now. Tell him you are in trouble. Tell him the IRS is after you. Tell him anything. Just get him to liquidate something. He would do it for you. He is pathetic like that. He loves you. Use it. Justin hesitated. He thought about the way I had looked at the party. He thought about the tea spilling. He thought about the confusion in my voice on the phone. He still saw me as the weak, trembling old man who couldn't hold a teapot. He didn't see the shark circling in the water. You really think he will help? Justin asked, his voice trembling with a mix of hope and guilt. He has to, Brittany said firmly. He is your father. That is what parents are for. They clean up our messes. Now pick up the phone. Cry if you have to. Just get the money. Justin took a deep breath. He reached for his phone. He dialed my number. I was sitting in my car parked just down the street watching the building. I saw the sun reflect off the penthouse window. I knew exactly what was happening up there. When my phone rang and I saw Justin's name on the screen, I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a cold, heavy resolve. They had taken the bait. They were desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. I let it ring twice before I answered, preparing my voice for the performance of a lifetime. The trap was set. Now I just had to close the door. The doorbell rang at 4 in the afternoon. It wasn't the aggressive, demanding ring from their last visit, nor was it the confident ring of a guest. It was a hesitant, desperate sound. I was sitting in my armchair reading a book on naval history, waiting for them. I knew they would come. The timeline James and I had constructed was mathematically perfect. The notice of arrears had been delivered at 10. The shock would have lasted until noon. The fighting and blaming would have taken them until 2. And the realization that they had no other options would have driven them to their cars by 3. I opened the door. Justin and Brittany stood there. The transformation was remarkable. Gone were the designer sunglasses and the sneer of superiority. Justin looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and clammy. Brittany was wearing a modest cardigan over a simple dress, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, devoid of the flashy jewelry she usually flaunted. In her hands she held a plastic-wrapped basket. "Hi, Dad," Justin said, his voice cracking. We were just in the neighborhood." "We brought you something," Brittany added, thrusting the basket toward me with a trembling smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It is just some fruit. We know how much you like health." I took the basket. It was light. I looked down at it. 3 apples, 2 oranges, and a bunch of grapes that were already turning brown at the stems. It was a gas station fruit basket. The price sticker was half peeled off the bottom, but I could still make out the number. $12.99. They were asking for a fortune, and they brought me $12 of rotting fruit as a bribe. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They walked into the living room, the same room they had insulted just days ago. This time they didn't complain about the smell or the furniture. They sat down on the edge of the sofa, knees pressed together, looking like school children waiting for the principal. I sat in my chair and waited. I didn't offer tea. I didn't offer water. I wanted them to feel the thirst. So Justin said, clearing his throat loudly, "How have you been, Dad? We have been thinking about you a lot since the other day. We felt bad about how we left things." "It has been quiet," I said, staring at him. "Very quiet." Brittany leaned forward, reaching out to touch my hand. Her skin was cold. "Tom, we just want you to know that we love you. Sometimes families fight, you know. But we are still family. That is what matters." I looked at her hand on mine. It felt like a snake coiling before a strike. I gently pulled my hand away and placed it on the armrest. "What do you want, Justin?" Justin flinched. He looked at Brittany for help. She nodded imperceptibly. "Dad." "I am in trouble," Justin blurted out, and to his credit, the tears that welled up in his eyes were real. Fear does that to a man. "Big trouble. It is complicated. I made a mistake at work. A compliance error. I trusted the wrong people." "What kind of error?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "There was an investment deal," he stammered, wringing his hands. "I signed off on some funds transfer that I shouldn't have. It was an accident, I swear. But now the auditors are involved. They are saying it looks like fraud. They are talking about bringing in the authorities." He paused, letting out a ragged breath. "Dad, if I don't pay back the deficit by tomorrow morning, they are going to press charges. I could go to prison. I could lose my license. My life would be over." I watched him spin the lie. It was a good story, mostly because it was adjacent to the truth. He was in trouble for fraud, but not the kind he was describing. And the deadline wasn't from an auditor. It was from his landlord. "How much is the deficit?" I asked. Justin swallowed hard. $100,000. I raised an eyebrow. "That is a very specific number. And a very large one." "It covers the legal fees too," Brittany interjected quickly, her voice high and breathless. "And the settlement. It makes the problem go away instantly. We just need to wire the money, and they close the file. No police. No prison." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs. I looked from one to the other. "So let me get this straight. You accidentally signed the wrong paper, and now you need $100,000 cash to bribe an auditor to not call the police. That sounds like another crime, Justin." No, it is a civil penalty," Justin said, sweat dripping down his temple. "It is totally legal. But I don't have that kind of liquidity right now. Our assets are tied up in investments." "I see," I said slowly. I picked up one of the apples from the basket they had brought. I turned it over in my hand, inspecting a soft, bruised spot. "You know what I don't understand," I said, looking up at them. "If you are about to go to prison, Justin, why are you worried about money? If you go to prison, the state provides you with housing and food. You won't need to pay rent. You won't need to buy groceries." Justin froze. "What?" I continued, my voice taking on a confused, elderly tone. "If the situation is that bad, shouldn't you be hiring a criminal defense lawyer instead of trying to pay a settlement? A good lawyer costs maybe $10,000 to start. Why do you need $100,000? Unless there is something else you need to pay for, like a debt or a bill." Brittany stiffened. She glared at me, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "It is not a bill, Tom. It is his freedom. Are you really going to sit there and debate semantics while your son is facing jail time?" I put the apple down. "I am just trying to understand the logic, Brittany. My mind isn't what it used to be, remember? You told me that yourself. I am slow. I am outdated." "Dad." "Please," Justin begged, sliding off the sofa to kneel on the rug. "I am begging you. I know you have the money. I know you have savings. Sell the house, take out a mortgage, anything. I will pay you back. I promise. I just need this one lifeline. Please, Dad, don't let me go to jail." I looked down at my son. He was on his knees begging for salvation from the very man he had plotted to rob. It was a pathetic sight. A week ago, he was too good to invite me to his wedding. Now he was ready to mortgage my future to save his present. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. "I can't do it, Justin." The room went silent. "What did you say?" Brittany whispered. "I said I can't do it," I repeated, turning to face them. I don't have $100,000 lying around. And even if I did, I couldn't give it to you. Why not? Justin cried, his face crumbling. Because I have to be practical, I said, using their own words against them. You two were right. I am old. I am getting frail. I need to think about my future. If I give you my savings, who will pay for my care at the Golden Horizon Resort? You said it yourselves, quality care is expensive. I can't be a burden on you, especially if you are in prison. I need to keep my assets safe. It is just financial restructuring. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Justin stared at me, his mouth open, unable to process that I was using his own selfish logic to deny him. Brittany stood up slowly. The modest, fearful demeanor evaporated. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated, ugly rage. You old bastard, she spat. Brittany. Justin gasped, but she ignored him. You are lying, she screamed, pointing a finger at my face. You are sitting on a pile of cash, and you are too selfish to help your own son. You want to see him ruined. You are jealous. That is what it is. You are jealous that he has a life and you are just a rotting corpse waiting to die in this dump. She kicked the fruit basket. The plastic ripped and the bruised apples rolled across the floor. We drove all the way out here to this godforsaken suburb. We lowered ourselves to beg you, and this is how you treat us. You are going to let him go to jail so you can play bingo at a retirement home. You make me sick. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell back. I just watched her unravel. Get up, Justin, she barked at my son. Get off your knees. He is not going to help. He is useless. He has always been useless. We will find the money somewhere else. We will go to a loan shark. We will steal it. I don't care. Anything is better than begging this senile old miser. Justin stood up, wiping his eyes. He looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes anymore. Only fear and resentment. You really don't care, do you, Dad? He whispered. I care enough to let you learn, I thought. But I said nothing. Come on, Brittany yelled, grabbing his arm and dragging him toward the door. I hope you rot in this house, Tom. I hope when you die, nobody finds you for weeks. They slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I stood in the center of the living room, listening to the sound of their car peeling out of the driveway. I looked down at the apples scattered on the rug. I picked one up. It was mushy and brown on one side. They had come to harvest the last of my crop, expecting it to be easy picking. They didn't realize the tree had roots of steel. I walked to the kitchen and dropped the apple in the trash. The performance was over. They were desperate now, and desperate people do reckless things. I checked my watch. It was 4:30. The banks closed at 5. They had 30 minutes to realize they had no options left, and then the real spiral would begin. I needed to make one more call, this time to the security team at the Zenith. Tonight was going to be a long night. After the taillights of my son's car disappeared around the corner, leaving only the echo of Brittany's curse words hanging in the humid afternoon air, I did not sit down to weep. There is a time for mourning, and there is a time for surgery. I had already mourned the loss of the son I thought I had. Now it was time to cut out the rot before it killed him completely. I walked back into my study and picked up the phone. I didn't need to look up the number. I was calling Robert Sterling, the CEO of Sterling and Finch, the marketing firm, where Justin held the title of Director of Strategy. It was a fancy title for a made-up job. 20 years ago, Robert was a young man with a brilliant mind, but no capital. I saw his potential. I wrote the check that launched his agency. I never asked for equity, and I never asked for repayment. I only asked for one favor 5 years ago. I asked him to hire my son and give him a chance to learn the ropes. Robert answered on the first ring. Hello, Tom. His voice was warm, respectful. To what do I owe the pleasure? Robert, I said, leaning back in my chair and watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight. I am calling to call in my favor. Anything, Tom. You know that. Just name it. I want you to fire Justin." The silence on the other end was absolute. I could hear the faint hum of the server room in Robert's office downtown. "Fire him," Robert repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tom, are you sure? I mean, he is not the best employee, we both know that. He is a bit entitled. But we have kept him on because of you. We cover his mistakes. We approve his expenses. It is the least we can do." "That is exactly the problem, Robert," I said, my voice hardening. "We have crippled him with kindness. We have protected him from the consequences of his own mediocrity. He thinks he is a business genius because he has never felt the sting of failure. He thinks the rules don't apply to him because we have always waived them. But to fire him, Tom—" Robert hesitated. "That is harsh. He has a wife, he has a lifestyle, he has a parasite," I corrected. "And he needs a wake-up call that money cannot fix. I want you to treat him exactly like you would treat any other employee who performed the way he does. I want you to audit his expense account." "I am stopping the reimbursements, Robert. You know those overages I pay every month to cover his client dinners and his travel?" "Yes," Robert said slowly. "The reimbursement fund. You cover about $10,000 a month in his personal spending that he charges to the company card." "I am closing that fund effective immediately," I said. "Which means, as of this morning, Justin is not spending my money. He is stealing your money." I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end. Robert was a businessman. He understood the legal implication instantly. "If you stop the cover payments," Robert said, his voice turning professional, "then Justin is guilty of gross misconduct and embezzlement of company funds. I would have no choice but to terminate him for cause." "Exactly," I said. "Do it tomorrow morning. Don't let him resign. Don't give him a severance package. Fire him. Escort him out of the building. And Robert, make sure he understands why." I hung up the phone. It was the hardest call I have ever made. It felt like signing the death warrant for my son's ego. But it was necessary. He had threatened to go to a loan shark. He had threatened to steal. He needed to see that the world outside of my protection was cold and unforgiving. The next morning, the sun rose over Chicago with a deceptive brightness. I wasn't there to see it, but I know exactly how it unfolded. Justin would have walked into the glass-walled lobby of Sterling and Finch around 9:30, late as usual. He would have swiped his badge, not noticing the red light that blinked for a fraction of a second. Before the gate opened, a glitch he would have thought just like the bank account. He would have ridden the elevator up to the 30th floor, adjusting his tie, rehearsing the lies he was going to tell his boss about why he needed a salary advance. He probably thought he could charm his way out of it. He probably thought he was indispensable. He walked to his office expecting to see his assistant. Instead, he found 2 security guards standing by his desk. And sitting in his chair was not his assistant, but the human resources director, a woman named Karen who had never smiled in her life. "Justin," Karen said, standing up, "please come with us to the conference room." "What is this?" Justin asked, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "Is this about the quarterly review? I know my numbers are a little down, but I have some big leads." "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you," Karen said, cutting him off. They walked him down the hallway. He must have felt the eyes of his colleagues on him. The whispers. The sudden silence as he passed the cubicles. They knew. In an office, the smell of blood travels faster than an email. He entered Robert's office. Robert didn't stand up. He sat behind his desk, a thick file in front of him. He looked sad. He looked disappointed. "Have a seat, Justin." Justin sat, his confidence evaporating. "Robert, look, if this is about the advance." "It is about theft, Justin," Robert said, sliding the file across the desk. "Theft," Justin sputtered. "I have never stolen a dime. I am the director of strategy." Robert opened the file. It was filled with credit card statements, The company card. $3,000 for a dinner at Le Monde. Robert read. You listed it as client entertainment, but we checked the guest list. It was just you and your wife. That was networking, Justin stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. Brittany is an influencer. She brings in business. $5,000 for a weekend at the Four Seasons. Robert continued ignoring him. Listed as a conference. There was no conference that weekend, Justin. Justin stood up, his face red. Everyone does this. It is part of the compensation package. It is the cost of doing business. You have always approved it. Why are you nitpicking now? We approved it because your father paid for it, Robert said quietly. The room went deadly silent. Justin froze. What? For 5 years, Robert explained, his voice heavy with pity, your father has secretly reimbursed this company for every single unauthorized expense you charged. Every dinner, every trip, every bottle of wine. He covered it so you could feel successful. He wanted you to have the dignity of a high salary. But he stopped the payments yesterday. Justin slumped back into the chair. His world was tilting on its axis. His success, his lifestyle, his career. It was all a mirage paid for by the old man he had called useless. So now, Robert said, closing the file, you are spending the company's money. And that is embezzlement. We are terminating your employment immediately for cause. You have 10 minutes to collect your personal effects. Your company phone and laptop stay here. Your access to the building is revoked. But I have a mortgage, Justin whispered, his voice cracking. I have debts. You can't do this. Robert, please. I have known you for years. I know your father, Robert said, standing up and turning his back. And I respect him enough to do what he asked. He wants you to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. Goodbye, Justin. The security guards stepped forward, one on each side. They didn't touch him, but their presence was a wall of force. Justin walked out of the office. He walked past the people he used to boss around. He walked past the interns he used to ignore. He went to his desk, dumped his framed photos of Brittany into a cardboard box, and was marched to the elevator. The ride down to the lobby was the longest of his life. When the doors opened, the doorman, the same one who used to greet him by name, looked through him as if he didn't exist. He walked out onto the street, the box in his arms, the wind whipping at his face. He needed a drink. He needed to think. He walked to the nearest Starbucks and ordered a black coffee. He tapped his phone against the payment terminal. Beep. Declined. He frowned. He tried again. Beep. Declined. Try the chip, the barista said, looking at the line forming behind him. He inserted the card. It was his personal card, the one linked to his salary account. Beep. Transaction denied. Contact issuer. He tried his credit card. The platinum one. Beep. Declined. His hands started to shake. He realized then that the company card wasn't the only thing that had been cut off. The banks had frozen his assets. The investigation, Robert mentioned it, had triggered a flag. Or maybe, just maybe, his father had closed the backdoor access to the emergency liquidity he had always relied on. He left the coffee on the counter and walked out, humiliated. He stood on the sidewalk surrounded by people rushing to their jobs, people who had paychecks, people who had lives. He was nobody. He pulled out his phone, his personal phone. It was the only thing he had left. He dialed Brittany. Pick up, pick up, pick up, he muttered. What? She answered, her voice annoyed. Did you get the money from your dad? No, Justin whispered, leaning against the cold brick wall of the building he used to work in. Then don't bother coming home, she snapped. Brittany, listen to me, he said, a sob rising in his throat. I was fired. Silence. What did you say? I was fired. They know everything. The expenses, The fraud. Dad. Dad stopped paying for us. It is all gone, Britt. The job, the cards, everything. We have nothing. He waited for her to comfort him. He waited for her to say they would get through it together. "You idiot," she screamed. "You useless, pathetic idiot. I told you to fix this." The line went dead. Justin lowered the phone. He looked at the black screen. He was standing in the middle of Chicago with a box of office supplies and $12 in his pocket. The trap had snapped shut. The career was dead. The marriage was dying. And the only person who could save him was the man he had left sitting alone in a house that smelled like mothballs. But he knew with a terrifying certainty that that door was locked tight. The bottom had fallen out, and he was still falling. The clock on the wall struck 5. The banking day was officially over. The deadline had passed. I sat in my study, the leather of my chair cool against my back, a glass of water untouched on the coaster beside me. I was not nervous. I was not pacing the floor, wringing my hands like a worried parent. I was calm. It was the calm of a judge who has already written the sentence and is simply waiting for the defendant to enter the courtroom. I knew exactly what was happening on the other side of the city. I knew that the eviction notice from the T&C group had just become enforceable. I knew that the grace period for the $90,000 had expired. And I knew that my son and his wife were currently staring at a digital abyss, watching their lives crumble in real time. They had no job. They had no credit. They had no money. And now they had no home. The phone rang. It cut through the silence like a fire alarm. I looked at the caller ID. It was Brittany. Of course it was. Justin would be too broken to call. He was likely curled up in a corner of that expensive sofa, paralyzed by the sudden removal of the safety net he had taken for granted his entire life. Brittany, however, was a fighter. She was a survivor. But she fought dirty, and she was about to learn that you do not bring a knife to a nuclear war. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted her to sweat. I wanted her to feel every second of delay. On the 4th ring, I picked up the receiver and brought it slowly to my ear. I did not say hello. "You old bastard," she screamed. The sound was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was raw, shredded by hours of panic and rage. It was the sound of a cornered animal. "Where is the money?" she shrieked. "Did you transfer it?" "The deadline is past, Tom. The management office just sent us a final warning. They are threatening to lock us out tonight. Did you send the wire? Tell me you sent the wire." I sat perfectly still, listening to her frantic breathing on the other line. I could hear sobbing in the background. That would be Justin. "Are you deaf?" she yelled again. "I am talking to you. You got him fired, Tom. I know you did. Justin told me everything. You called his boss. You ruined his career. You petty, vindictive old man. How could you do that to your own son? We have nothing. Do you hear me? We have absolutely nothing." I took a slow breath. Her anger was fuel. It confirmed everything I needed to know. She didn't care about Justin's career because of his fulfillment. She cared because the cash flow had stopped. "Are you going to speak?" she hissed. "Or did you have a stroke? Did you send the $90,000 for the rent arrears?" I cleared my throat. My voice was low, steady, and completely devoid of the trembling frailty I had feigned for the last week. "The rent," I repeated, testing the word on my tongue. "Yes, the rent," she screamed. "The money to save our home. Did you transfer it?" I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that no one was there to see. "No, Brittany. I didn't." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. It was as if she couldn't process the word. "What do you mean, no?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. You didn't transfer it." "I am not transferring it," I said, leaning back in my chair. Not today. Not tomorrow, not ever. Her explosion was immediate. You are crazy. You are actually crazy. Do you want us on the street? Do you want your grandchildren? There are no grandchildren. Brittany, I cut her off, my voice sharp as a whip. Stop using leverage you do not have. You have the money, she yelled. I know you have it. You are just being spiteful because we didn't invite you to the wedding. Is that it? Is this about the wedding? You are destroying our lives because of a party. I stood up then. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. A long black car had just pulled up to the curb. My ride was here. It is not about the party, Brittany, I said calmly. It is about the principle. Principle, she spat. What principle? You are a monster. I waited a beat. I wanted this next sentence to land with the force of a physical blow. I wanted it to echo in her head for the rest of her life. Didn't I tell you, I said softly. Tell me what, she snapped. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. I seem to recall a conversation we had, I said. You told me that the wedding in Napa Valley was very exclusive. You told me it was only for special people. So what, she screamed. Get over it. Well, I continued, my voice hardening into steel. Since I wasn't a special person enough to attend your wedding, I realized something today. I realized that I am also not special enough to pay your rent anymore. The line went dead silent. You see, Brittany, I said, delivering the final strike. That subsidy you have been enjoying. That 90% discount that allowed you to live like a queen on a pauper's salary. That was a special privilege. It was a gift for family. But if I am not family enough to see my son get married, then I am certainly not family enough to subsidize his housing. I could hear her breathing hitch. The gears in her head were grinding. She was starting to connect the dots. She was realizing that the subsidy wasn't a corporate perk. It wasn't a stroke of luck. It was me. It had always been me. Wait, she whispered. Her voice sounded small now, terrified. You are the one. I didn't let her finish. Welcome to the market rate, sweetheart, I said. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the disconnect button. The click was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. I placed the phone back on the cradle. It was done. The cord was cut. I turned away from the desk. Laying on the leather ottoman was my suit. It wasn't the charcoal gray one I wore to the office. It was a midnight blue three-piece custom suit made of Italian wool. It was a power suit. It was the kind of suit a man wears when he owns the room, the building, and the block. I dressed slowly. I buttoned the crisp white shirt. I fastened the silk tie. I slipped into the vest and the jacket. I checked my reflection in the mirror. The eyes staring back at me were not the eyes of a retired grandfather. They were the eyes of Thomas Caldwell, the chairman. I walked out of the study and down the hallway. I didn't look back at the empty rooms. I opened the front door. The air outside was crisp. Parked at the curb, the black limousine idled its engine, a low, powerful purr. The driver, a man named Michael, who had been on my payroll for a decade, stepped out and opened the rear door. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with respect. Good evening, Mr. Caldwell, he said. To the zenith. To the zenith, Michael, I replied. I slid into the leather seat. The door closed with a solid thud, sealing me inside the quiet luxury of the car. As we pulled away from the curb, I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the car's bar. I watched the suburban houses blur past the tinted window. I was going to the city. I was going to my building. My tenants were waiting for me. They probably thought they could scream and shout and bully their way out of this. They probably thought they could confront the management and demand answers. They had no idea that the management was coming to them. I took a sip of water. It was time to introduce myself. Not as Tom the handyman, not as Tom the ATM, but as the landlord. and tonight I was going to clean house. The elevator descent from the penthouse to the lobby felt like a freefall. Inside the mirrored box, the air was thick with the scent of Brittany's expensive perfume which had turned sour with sweat. She was pacing the small space, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the floor, while Justin leaned against the back wall looking like a man marching to the gallows. He was pale, and his hands were shaking violently, but Brittany was fueled by a manic, desperate energy. She was convinced that this was just a clerical error or a misunderstanding that she could scream her way out of. She believed that if she just made enough noise and threatened enough lawsuits, the management would back down. She had spent her entire adult life bullying service workers and getting what she wanted, and she saw no reason why tonight would be any different. When the elevator doors slid open, they didn't walk out, they stormed out. Brittany led the charge, her face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation, ready to demand to speak to a supervisor. She marched toward the front desk, her voice already rising to a shrill pitch. "Excuse me," she shouted at the receptionist who was typing on a computer. "We need to speak to the property manager immediately. We have received a harassment email and I want it fixed now." But the receptionist didn't look up. In fact, she didn't even flinch. The entire lobby, which was usually a bustle of residents and delivery people, was strangely quiet. There was a tension in the air, a kind of electric charge that happens when someone of immense power enters a room. Brittany stopped, confused by the lack of reaction. She looked around, and that was when she saw it. In the center of the grand lobby stood a group of men. There was the building manager, a man Brittany had only seen once and who was known for his arrogance. There was the head of security, a towering figure who usually looked at residents with boredom. And there were 3 other men in dark suits holding clipboards. They were all standing in a semicircle, their heads bowed slightly, their postures radiating pure deference. They were focused entirely on one man who was standing with his back to the elevator. This man was wearing a midnight blue suit that fit him so perfectly it looked like a second skin. His hair was silver and neatly combed, and his posture was upright and commanding. He held a cane not for support, but as an accessory of authority. Brittany scoffed loudly. "Hello," she yelled again, stepping toward the group. "Is anyone working here? I am talking to you." The building manager turned around. His face was pale. He held up a hand, signaling her to stop. "Not now, Mrs. Caldwell," he hissed. "We are in a meeting." "I don't care about your meeting," Brittany screamed, pushing past him. "You sent me an eviction notice. You are trying to kick us out of our home. I want to know who authorized this. I want to see the owner." The man in the blue suit turned around slowly. The scream died in Brittany's throat. It didn't fade away. It was strangled out of existence by sheer shock. She stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth hanging open. Beside her, Justin made a sound that was half gasp and half sob. It was Tom. But it wasn't the Tom they knew. It wasn't the Tom who wore flannel shirts and spilled tea. It wasn't the Tom who drove a 10-year-old Ford and lived in a house that smelled like mothballs. This man looked like a titan. His eyes behind his rimless glasses were cold and sharp like cut diamonds. He looked at them not with the warmth of a father or the confusion of an old man, but with the detached appraisal of a judge looking at a repeat offender. "Dad." Justin whispered, his voice barely audible. "What? What are you doing here?" Tom didn't answer. He didn't even blink. He simply stood there, leaning on his cane, looking at them as if they were strangers who had wandered into the wrong building. Brittany recovered first, her brain scrambling to make sense of the impossibility before her. She laughed a high, hysterical sound. "Tom," she said, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You followed us here. You put on a suit and followed us here to embarrass us. You are pathetic. Get out. Security, get him out of here." She turned to the head of security, expecting him to grab Tom and drag him away. But the head of security didn't move. He kept his eyes on the floor, respectful and silent. Brittany looked around wildly. "Why aren't you doing anything?" she shrieked. "He is trespassing. He is a senile old man. Throw him out. Excuse me, Mrs. Caldwell. A deep voice cut through her hysteria. A man stepped out from behind Tom. It was James, the lawyer. He was holding a briefcase and looking at Brittany with a mixture of pity and distaste. I would advise you to lower your voice, James said calmly. You are currently shouting at the chairman of the board. Brittany stared at him. The chairman, she repeated dumbly. What are you talking about? James gestured to the man in the blue suit. Allow me to make the formal introduction, since you seem to be unaware of who you have been dealing with. This is Mr. Thomas Caldwell. He is the founder and majority shareholder of T&C Group. James paused, letting the words hang in the air. T&C Group, James continued. The T stands for Thomas. The C stands for Caldwell. He is the owner of this building. He is the owner of the logistics company that employed your husband until this morning. And he is the landlord you have been defrauding for the past 6 months. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so heavy it felt like it could crush bones. Justin staggered back as if he had been physically punched. He looked at the logo on the wall behind the reception desk. A stylized T&C interlaced in gold. He had walked past that logo every day for 3 years. He had seen it on his paychecks. He had seen it on the lease agreement. Thomas and Caldwell. It had been staring him in the face the entire time. Oh my God, Justin whispered, clutching his chest. It was you! It was always you! Brittany was shaking her head violently. No, she said, her voice trembling. No, that is impossible. He is a truck driver. He is a nobody. He lives in a dump. This is a lie. This is some kind of sick joke. Tom took a step forward. The sound of his expensive leather shoes on the marble floor echoed like a gavel strike. It is no joke, Brittany, Tom said. His voice was rich and deep, resonating with power. It is simply business. You wanted to live a life of luxury. You wanted to be special. So I gave you a castle in the sky. I let you live here for pennies. I covered your bills. I watched you pretend to be royalty while you treated the man who paid for your crown like a peasant. He stopped just a few feet away from them. He looked taller than they remembered. You called me useless, Brittany, Tom said softly. You called me a miser. You said I was just waiting to die. Well, the corpse has woken up, and he is auditing the books. Justin fell to his knees. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was a collapse of his legs giving way under the weight of the realization. He looked up at his father. His eyes filled with terror. Dad, please, he choked out. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Ignorance is not a defense, Justin, Tom replied coldly, looking down at him. Especially when that ignorance is willful. You were so busy looking in the mirror, you never bothered to look at where the money was coming from. You thought you were a self-made man. You were just a child playing dress-up in his father's closet. Brittany grabbed Justin's arm, trying to pull him up, her nails digging into his suit jacket. Don't beg him, she hissed, though her own eyes were wide with fear. We have rights. We have a lease. You can't just throw us out. James stepped forward again, opening a document on his clipboard. Actually, Mrs. Caldwell, we can. The eviction order was signed by a judge an hour ago based on significant breach of contract and malicious destruction of property. You are no longer tenants. You are trespassers. Tom turned to the head of security. Captain. Yes, Mr. Chairman, the guard replied, snapping to attention. These individuals have 30 minutes to vacate the premises, Tom said, checking his watch. They may take only their personal clothing and toiletries. Any furniture, electronics, or items purchased with funds from the unauthorized use of company accounts will remain as collateral against the debt they owe. Wait! Brittany screamed, lunging toward Tom. You can't do that. My clothes are in there. My jewelry. My bags. Your bags were bought with my medical fund, Tom said, his voice cutting like a knife. They belong to me. He turned his back on them. It was the ultimate dismissal. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked done. "Captain, escort them upstairs," Tom said over his shoulder. "And then escort them to the street. If they resist, call the police." Tom began to walk away, his cane tapping rhythmically on the floor. "Dad." Justin screamed, reaching out a hand toward his father's retreating back. "Dad, please, where do we go? What do we do?" Tom stopped. He didn't turn around. He just paused for a brief second. "You figure it out, Justin," Tom said. "That is what adults do." He continued walking, heading toward the private elevator that led to the executive suites. Behind him, the sounds of Brittany's screaming and Justin's sobbing were cut off as the security guards moved in to enforce the order. Tom didn't flinch. He pressed the button and the golden doors opened, welcoming him home. The 30-minute countdown was not a suggestion. It was a ticking bomb that hung over the penthouse, suffocating the air that had once smelled of expensive lilies and denial. The security team moved with the precision of a military unit. They stood by the doors, their arms crossed, watching silently as the life my son had built was dismantled piece by piece. There was no shouting anymore. The screaming had died down into a frantic, terrified scramble. Justin was throwing clothes into a suitcase with no rhyme or reason, tossing silk ties on top of dirty socks, his hands shaking so badly he could barely work the zippers. He looked like a man trying to salvage wreckage from a burning ship. I stood by the fireplace, leaning on my cane, watching them. I felt no joy in this. There is no victory in watching your own child bleed, even if you are the one holding the scalpel. But I did not look away. I owed it to the boy he used to be to watch the man he had become hit the bottom. Brittany was not packing. She was bargaining. She was running from room to room, grabbing items, a vase, a painting, a limited edition sculpture, only to have a security guard gently but firmly take them from her hands. "That remains with this property," the guard said, his voice devoid of emotion. Brittany dropped the vase. It didn't break on the plush carpet, but the thud echoed like a gunshot. She spun around, her hair wild, her eyes scanning the room for an exit that didn't exist. Her gaze landed on me. "Tom, please," she wailed, rushing toward me. She stopped just short of my cane, afraid to touch me. "You can't do this. This is illegal. You can't just throw a woman onto the street in the middle of the night. I have nowhere to go. My parents are in Florida. I have no cash." I looked at her. I looked at the diamond earrings she was still wearing, earrings I knew were bought with the money intended for my heart medication. "You have feet, Brittany," I said calmly, "and you have a very expensive education. I suggest you use both." She let out a sound of pure frustration and turned on her heel, looking for a softer target. She found Justin. He was struggling to close a suitcase that was overflowing with designer suits. "This is your fault," she screamed at him, marching over and kicking the suitcase. "You did this. You lied to me. You told me you were handling the finances. You told me your father was a nobody. You dragged me into this mess." Justin stopped. He looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen. "I did everything for you," he whispered. "I stole for you. I laundered money for you. I lost my job for you. For me." She laughed a cruel, sharp sound. "You did it because you are weak, Justin. You did it because you knew you weren't good enough for me, and you had to buy my affection. And look where it got us. Homeless, bankrupt." She turned back to me, clasping her hands together in a pleading gesture. "Tom, listen to me. He tricked me too. I didn't know about the embezzlement. I didn't know he was stealing from you. I am a victim here. If I had known he was treating you like that, I would have left him immediately. You know I have always respected you." I watched her rewrite history in real time. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was ready to feed her husband to the wolves if it meant she could stay in the warmth of the pack. Justin stared at her. The betrayal on his face was absolute. "Brittany, how can you say that?" he choked out. "We were in this together." "Shut up, Justin," she snapped. "Tom, please. Let me stay. Just for a few days. I will help you with the transition. I can testify against him if you want. I can help you with the lawsuit. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I felt the envelope there. It was heavy. You are very generous with your loyalty, Brittany, I said, pulling the envelope out. But I think you are forgetting something. What? She asked, her eyes darting to the paper in my hand. I walked over to Justin. He was still kneeling on the floor, broken. I held the envelope out to him. Take it, I said. He looked at me confused. What is this? The reason you are broke, I said. The reason you needed to steal $100,000. You thought you were paying for a lifestyle, Justin? You thought you were paying for her happiness. But you were just paying the admission fee for someone else's show. Justin took the envelope. His hands were trembling so much he almost dropped it. He opened the flap. He pulled out the photographs. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched his eyes widen as he looked at the first photo. Brittany kissing the man in the blue suit. The second photo. Brittany handing him an envelope of cash. The third photo. Brittany entering a hotel room with him. Brittany saw the photos. She went silent. For the first time all night, she had nothing to say. Who is this? Justin whispered. The sound was barely a breath. That is Marcus Thorne, I said. The man you have been laundering money for. The man you risked federal prison to impress. You weren't investing in a startup, son. You were funding your wife's boyfriend. Justin looked up at Brittany. He looked at the woman he had worshipped. The woman he had destroyed his relationship with his father for. Is it true? He asked. Brittany didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She saw the game was over, and she dropped the act. She straightened her back, and her face hardened into a sneer. So what if it is? She said coldly. Look at him, Justin. He is a winner. He knows how to make money without begging his daddy. You are pathetic. You were always just a stepping stone. Justin didn't scream. He didn't yell. He just crumpled. He let the photos fall to the floor, scattering over the Persian rugs like dead leaves. He put his head in his hands and let out a sob that sounded like something dying. He had lost his house. He had lost his career. And now he realized he never really had a wife. Time is up, the head of security announced. 2 guards stepped forward. They picked up the suitcases. Let's go, folks, the guard said. Brittany grabbed her purse. She didn't look at Justin. She walked to the door, her head held high, clutching her dignity like it was the last designer item she owned. She walked past me without a word. Justin struggled to his feet. He looked like an old man. He looked older than me. He looked around the beautiful apartment one last time, seeing the ghost of the life he thought he had. Then he looked at me. Dad, he whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. If I spoke now, I would break. I just nodded toward the door. He turned and walked out. He walked with a heavy, shuffling step. I followed them. We walked down the hallway to the elevators. Not the service elevator this time. I let them take the main car. I wanted them to see the reflection of their failure in the polished brass doors. We rode down in silence. The lobby was empty now. The staff watched from a distance. We walked to the main entrance. The doorman, the one who had tried to send me to the alley, rushed to open the door. He held it wide, his eyes fixed on the ground, terrified to look at me. Brittany walked out first. The night air hit her, and I saw her shiver. She looked left and right, realizing there was no car waiting for her. No limousine. Just the cold, hard pavement of Chicago. Justin followed her. He stopped on the sidewalk. He looked at the suitcases piled next to the curb. 2 suitcases for a lifetime of mistakes. I stood in the doorway. The warmth of the building was at my back. The cold of the street was in front of them. Goodbye, Justin, I said. He turned to look at me. The glass doors were already starting to close. "Dad, wait!" he cried out, stepping forward. But the doors swung shut. The heavy glass sealed with a soft, final thud. I stood there looking through the pane. I saw my son mouthing words I couldn't hear. I saw him banging his fist weakly against the glass. I saw Brittany standing apart from him, already typing on her phone, looking for her next victim. I turned the lock. It was done. I turned my back on the street. I turned my back on the pleading. I looked at the grand lobby of the Zenith. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was mine. I signaled to the security captain. "Clear the floor," I said, and change the codes. I walked toward the elevator. I was going back up to the penthouse. It would be empty now. It would be silent. But it would be clean. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. The surgery was successful. The patient was in critical condition out there in the cold. But he was alive. And now he had to learn how to survive. The silence in the penthouse was no longer heavy. For the first time in 3 years, the air in the apartment felt light, breathable, and clean. It had been exactly 30 days since the eviction, and in that time I had hired a professional cleaning crew to scrub every inch of the space. They removed the smell of Brittany's cloying perfume. They removed the unauthorized walk-in closet, restoring the original wall. They removed the pretentious modern art that looked like spilled paint and replaced it with nothing. Just open white walls and the stunning view of the Chicago skyline. I sat in the center of the living room on a single comfortable leather chair I had brought from my house. The rest of the room was empty. The marble floors gleamed in the sunlight, unburdened by furniture or ego. It was a blank canvas, and for a man of 70, a blank canvas is a beautiful thing. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. It was not the shrill ring that used to make my stomach tighten. It was a soft vibration. I picked it up. The number was unfamiliar, a local landline. "Hello," I answered, my voice calm. "Dad." The voice was quiet. It lacked the arrogance of the director of strategy. It lacked the desperation of the man begging for money. It sounded tired. It sounded human. "Hello, Justin," I said. "I didn't think you would answer," he said. There was a pause filled with the background noise of clattering dishes and murmuring voices. I wanted to call you. I am on my break. Where are you?" I asked. "I am at a diner on the south side," he replied. "I got a job, Dad. It is not much. I am waiting tables. The lunch rush just ended. My feet are killing me." I closed my eyes and smiled faintly. I remembered that pain. I remembered the ache in my lower back after unloading trucks for 12 hours straight when I was his age. It was a good pain. It was the pain of earning your existence. "That is good, Justin," I said genuinely. "Honest work cleans the soul." "Yeah." He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "It also cleans out your pride." "Brittany left me, Dad. The divorce papers came yesterday. She is going after spousal support, but since I have 0 assets and minimum wage income, her lawyer wasn't very happy." "I suspected she would," I said. "She was in love with the lifestyle, not the man. When the lifestyle left, she followed it." "I am sorry, Dad," he whispered, and I could hear his voice choke up. "I am so sorry for everything. For the wedding. For the money. For letting her treat you like garbage. I was so blind. I thought I was a big shot, but I was just a puppet. I miss you. I miss home. Can I come see you?" I looked out the window at the city I had helped build. I loved my son. I would always love my son. But I knew that if I let him come back now, if I cushioned his fall, I would undo everything. The butterfly has to struggle to break the cocoon. If you help it, its wings will never be strong enough to fly. "Not yet, Justin," I said softly. The silence on the other end was heartbreaking. "Why not?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Because you are just starting to walk," I told him. "You are learning what $1 is actually worth. You are learning what it feels like to stand on your own 2 feet without my credit card holding you up. If I let you come back now, you will revert. You need to feel the callus on your hands. You need to know that you can survive without me." "But I am alone," he said. "We are all alone in the end, son," I replied. "That is why you have to like the person you see in the mirror. Right now, you are building a man you can respect. Don't stop the construction halfway." "When can I see you then?" "When you don't need me anymore," I said. "When you want to see me just to have coffee, not to ask for a loan. When you can pay for your own lunch. Then come find me." "Okay, Dad," he whispered. "Okay. I will do it. I will make you proud." "You already have a better chance of that today than you did a month ago," I said. "Now go back to work. Don't keep your customers waiting." I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, letting the conversation settle in my heart. It was tough love, the toughest kind, but it was the only gift I had left to give him. The doorbell chimed. It was the private elevator. James walked in. He was holding a thick portfolio. He looked around the empty apartment and nodded approvingly. "It looks better this way," James said. "Less loud. It feels better," I agreed, standing up. "Do you have the papers?" James set the portfolio on the kitchen island. "Everything is drafted exactly as you instructed. The T&C group will remain under professional management. But the profits, the dividends that used to go to your family trust, they go to the Veterans Support Fund I finished for him." James uncapped a fountain pen and handed it to me. "It is a lot of money, Tom. Millions of dollars a year. You are sure about this? You could buy a yacht. You could buy an island." I took the pen. I thought about the fruit basket with the $12 price tag. I thought about the service elevator. I thought about the wedding invitation I never received. "I have enough, James," I said, signing my name with a flourish. "I have my health. I have my dignity. And I have my freedom. This money was poison to my family. It made them weak. It made them cruel. Maybe it can do some good for men and women who actually know the meaning of sacrifice." I closed the folder. It was done. The golden handcuffs were off. I was no longer the bank. I was just Tom. I walked to the bedroom. On the floor lay a single battered leather suitcase. It was the same suitcase I had used 40 years ago when I started my business. It didn't have wheels. It didn't have a designer logo. It had scars and scratches just like me. I packed my flannel shirts. I packed my comfortable trousers. I packed a few books. I left the Italian suits in the closet. I didn't need armor where I was going. I walked back to the elevator. James was waiting to escort me down. "Where to?" Tom James asked as we stepped into the car. "The airport." "Yes," I said, watching the numbers count down. "Any specific destination?" he asked. I smiled. For the first time in years, the smile reached my eyes. It felt genuine. It felt light. "I was thinking Italy," I said. "Or maybe Japan. Somewhere where nobody knows my name. Somewhere where I am just an old man enjoying a cup of coffee. I have spent my whole life building a legacy for other people. I think it is time I lived a little bit for myself." The doors opened to the lobby. The staff smiled at me. It wasn't the fearful bowing of a month ago. It was a warm, genuine goodbye. They respected me not because I was the owner, but because I was the man who had cleaned up the mess. I walked out through the revolving doors. The wind of Chicago hit my face, but it didn't feel cold. It felt fresh. It felt like a new beginning. I climbed into the back of a taxi, not a limousine. I rolled down the window as the car pulled away from the zenith. I looked up at the towering glass structure one last time. It was a monument to my success, but it had almost become my tomb. Now it was just a building. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. My son was washing dishes, learning to be a man. My daughter-in-law was gone, chasing her next illusion. And I was here, alive, awake, and finally truly free. Blood is a sacred thing. It binds us to our past, and it carries our future. But I learned the hard way that blood is not a license for abuse. You can love your children with every fiber of your being, but you cannot let them cannibalize your soul. Respect is the currency of any relationship, and if the account is overdrawn, you have to close it. Don't ever let anyone, even the people you birthed, trample on your dignity. Because at the end of the day, when the house is empty and the noise fades, your dignity is the only thing that sleeps in the bed with you. This story teaches us a powerful lesson about the difference between enabling and loving. True love isn't about giving endless financial support or shielding someone from the consequences of their actions. It's about teaching them resilience and integrity. When we allow family members to disrespect us and use us for their own gain, we aren't helping them, we are crippling their character. Setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of self-respect and necessary education. Sometimes you have to let the people you love fall so they can learn how to stand up on their own. If you have ever had to make a tough decision to protect your peace from toxic family members, hit that like button and share your story in the comments below. It might inspire someone else to take their life back. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. See you in the next video.